Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, share, and like buttons. Well, sorry I missed Monday. We actually took a quick family vacation. Thought I would be back in time to make a video on Monday. Didn't happen. So here we are on Wednesday. But I want to do an update on where we stand economically. What is the data showing? What does the story on the ground say is happening right now, and what's set to happen before the year ends economically? And what does it ultimately mean? Where are we headed? I believe we are headed firmly toward a global depression, a depression as bad or worse than the Great Depression, but I do not believe it will last as long as the Great Depression did. We're not looking at 10 years of those conditions, maybe 1 to 2 years of those conditions. And the central bankers and the politicians will do anything they can to avoid that scenario because of the political implications of that. Now, guys, I say all of that. I will change my mind. I will change my position if the underlying reasons change, if new information comes to light, if I come to find, well, what I thought was true turned out not to be true. I will change my mind and I will say so on here. But guys, that's not what I'm seeing. That's not what I'm seeing in the data. And we're going to look at some of that data today, starting with this right here. So this is from the Federal Reserve, the United States Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So this is official U.S. government data. What we're looking at here is a chart of the 2-year Treasury subtracted, or the 10-year Treasury, my mistake, subtracted by the 2-year Treasury. This is historically an indicator, a good indicator of a recession. When we see this go negative, you should expect that you would get a higher yield, a higher interest rate for lending your cash to the government for 10 years rather than you would for 2 years. And so when you get a higher rate for lending for 2 years versus 10, that gives you a negative value in this. And that is historically, when we look back, we can look at this data and see that within 12 to 18 months, of going negative, we generally see a recession. Now, these gray areas that we see here in this chart, each of these gray columns represents a period of recession, an official recession. So we've seen this going back, and all the data that they're showing here goes back to 1976. So we see it went negative here, and then it was followed by a recession, went positive, then it went back to negative. We had another recession. Then it remained positive until it went negative here, 1989. And within a year, we had a recession. It went negative again, March 2000. A little over a year later, we have a recession. It went negative here. Back in January 2006. And within 2 years, so within 2 years, I guess, I was off on that, not 12 to 18 months, but within 2 years, you see a recession. And of course, that was a rather large recession there. We even see it here. I know that it shows up here, but very briefly in August 2019, it went negative, and that was followed by the pandemic recession. But now we see this is definitely negative. It's been negative since July of 2022, so almost a year now since it's gone negative. So historically, that tells us we are pretty much certain, if the past is any guide, that within 1 year, we will officially be in a recession. If we're not in one already, generally, they don't recognize these until after the fact. Usually, a year or two after the fact, they say, oh, well, the recession began back here. And all along the way, they tell you, oh, there's no recession. Everything's fine. For those of you that remember the Great Recession, Great Financial Crisis, all that went on there, that officially began in December 2007. But for almost all of 2008, they told us, oh, everything's fine. Look at employment, it's fine. Look at the stock market, it's fine. And then, of course, the bottom fell out on both of those things at the end of 2008. And somewhere in 2009, they say, oh, yeah, recession started a couple of years ago. So they're way behind on the recession cause on this. But this indicator is a leading indicator. This is the canary in the coal mine telling us something bad is about to happen. That's what, when we see that negative there, that has always been followed for decades on end by a massive economic event, a contraction. Let's also look at additional data from Fred. This is net percentage of domestic banks tightening standards for commercial and industrial loans to large and middle market firms. Sounds big. What they're basically saying is, what are the lending standards that the financial institutions, are they loaning out cash to businesses right now? Are the lending standards tight? Are they very reluctant to lend out to businesses? Or is it very easy to get that credit? And so this is sort of the inverse of what we saw before. The higher it is, the tighter those standards are. The lower it is, the looser those credit standards are. So each time we see it go up, again, these gray columns represent recession, and we see them coincide with recession. And now we see we're up there again, maybe not to these highest levels, but up to where we see this zigzagging line. It tells us that credit is getting tight, and that often coincides with recession. How about this right here? Here we have a chart going back to the 1940s that shows this is actually two lines, the red one and the blue one. You can hardly tell on here because they are nearly exactly correlated with one another. One is gross domestic income, the other is gross domestic product. Gross domestic income is essentially, what are you earning? What are the people earning? What are collectively people earning per year versus what is the output of the nation? And these two should coincide. And of course, you can see from this chart, they generally do. But then when we close in and look a little bit closer at the 10-year, where we can see a little bit more closer, again, we see this correlation. But look at what's happening right here. The red line is gross domestic product. So they're telling us that the economy is growing faster than people's incomes. So history tells us these lines will converge once again. So either we're going to see a massive increase in people's incomes, or we're going to see gross domestic product revert back down to the mean and flatten out, the way we've seen since the third quarter of last year, to coincide with this gross domestic income. So this also is a chart telling us to expect economic contraction as we move forward. Here's another chart we've looked at in the past. This is M2, otherwise known as the money supply. I call it the currency supply. We've been over Y in the past. And here we see just how distorted things have become as a result of the pandemic, policies that were put in place, and the policies that were put in place afterwards. So we saw this huge explosion in the currency supply. And since then, we've seen a huge contraction. It's actually gone negative on an annual basis. Now, let's see. Well, I'm trying to zero in on exactly where it stands right now. We're still at negative 4.67%. Within a few days, they should update this chart, and we'll see where it stands then. But this is the worst we've seen since 1933 in the depths of the Great Depression. This is a big sign when you see a contraction in the currency supply like this, that we are going to see economic contraction. And there's a chart Jim Reed at Deutsche Bank put out just a couple of weeks ago that shows what exactly that means, what puts this into context for us. So it says here, when we look back at this chart showing the fastest money supply contraction since the 1930s, it will be obvious or will it be obvious what happens next? Historically, contractions have coincided with bad outcomes. Why would this time be any different? And so we see this historical chart of when the money supply or the currency supply has contracted throughout US history. And every time it has, we've had either major recessions or depressions. We see, the Panic of 1837, Panic of 1857, see post-Civil War deflation. All of these areas, the Great Depression right there. So every time we've seen this contraction, and it's been a long time since we've seen one, 1948-49 was the last time we saw a contraction, an annual contraction in the money supply. And so that's where we're headed, guys. That's what we're seeing here. And again, it's showing up in other data like this one right here. This is from Bank of America. This says, cardboard box demand hasn't been this weak since the great financial crisis. And this chart shows the year-over-year percentage change in cardboard box demand. Now think about just a couple of years ago, we had huge cardboard box demand. We were in the pandemic. All these people started ordering things online, and they said, there's a shortage of cardboard. We can't get enough cardboard. We need more cardboard. Well, now we're seeing just the exact opposite. And what does that tell you? Well, if there's no demand for cardboard, that means there's no demand for the products that cardboard would wrap because the economy is slowing down. And guys, they can tell you all they want. Oh, no, it's not. Look at this. Same-store sales are up 2%. But they're using that on a cash basis. They're telling you the dollars people spent. Well, we know inflation's 10, 15%. They may tell us it's 5. You've been to the store. I've been to the store. It isn't 5. It's 10, 15, 20%, depending on what item you're looking at. So if sales are up 2%, but the prices are up double digits, well, that means that you may be spending more than you did a year ago in dollar terms, but you're getting a lot less than you got a year ago. And that, to me, is economic contraction. They can say what they want. They can use the smoke and mirrors to try to tell us it's better than it is, but we know it's not. And that's what the data is telling us. So where do we stand on the ground right now? We had this article here from Freight Waves. This came out a couple of weeks ago. It says, well, actually a month ago it looks like, but it has some key insights that we need to pick up on here. It says an unusually terrible freight market may get a lot worse. Return of student loan payments, the latest thorn for the troubled consumer. And that's something that's not on a lot of people's radars, but it's going to have a big impact economically here in the next 2 to 3 months. And we'll get to that in just a second. But this starts out, it says, it's the worst freight market since the great financial crisis. This statement is commonly heard on our channel checks among carrier and broker executives and often repeated on social media. Now we have some evidence to support it. So this publication, they are geared toward trucking, the trucking industry. It says the National Truckload Index, which measures the average national truckload spot rate, meaning how much are you paid, is $1.49 a mile, breaking below the 2019 seasonal equivalent. While extremely low rates are bad enough on their own, the worst news is the operating costs for trucking companies, not including fuel, which again, the fuel prices are going back up. You don't hear a lot of talk about that in the media, are up more than 30 cents a mile in that same period. Operating expenses include maintenance, insurance, driver salaries, and equipment. On a cash flow adjusted basis, current spot rates are equivalent to $1.19 a mile without including any increases in the cost of capital to finance operations. And like they said, or gasoline. So trucking is getting devastated right now. Why is that? Well, because there is an economic slowdown. If people aren't ordering the products, then there's no need to have trucks to ship those products. It's common sense. But then we ride down, they talk about where they see the economy going, and there's an important part down toward the end of this article where it talks about consumers with student loan debt were able to save on average more than $15,000 since March 2020, and that's about to end. So what are they talking about? Where there was the student loan deferment plan put into place during the pandemic response. All these policies, all the stimulus checks, everything was being thrown around. Well, you don't have to pay your student loans. Well, now people are going to have to start paying on their student loans again. What does that mean? This tells us, it says one of the biggest COVID-related stimulus programs is not factored into our analysis or Motley Fool's numbers. So they were referencing that earlier in the article. Student loan forbearance. Since student loan payments were put on hold and not forgiven, neither FreightWaves nor Motley Fool calculated these as part of its consumer stimulus estimates. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona said the student loan deferment program will end no later than June 30th. So that's not far away, end of this month. And payments are expected to resume by September 1st. The amount of money we're talking about, in excess of $1 trillion, is staggering. Student loans represent 7% of U.S. GDP. Now they're talking about what is owed, which is staggering. But the payments on that, I don't want to say the payments on that are equal to 7% of U.S. GDP, but they're equal to quite a bit. It says 64% of the $1.7 trillion in student loan debt remains in forbearance, amounting to $1.1 trillion. Many of the 25 million Americans who have deferred payments for student debt are age 18 to 44. One of the most important demographic groups that drive consumer spending. According to a New York Federal Reserve study, the average loan payment is $393 per month. The original forbearance program was instituted by President Trump at the beginning of COVID in March 2020. For consumers taking advantage of the program, they have deferred 39 months worth of payments, resulting in more than $15,327 in additional discretionary income during that period, much larger than the amount most consumers received from other COVID stimulus programs. The forbearance program, when originally conceived, was intended to be a short-term program. How many times have you heard about these short-term government programs that you can never get rid of? It was expected to be a short-term program to protect consumers from the COVID black swan event. But many consumers made financial decisions based on the short-term cash flow boost, treating the cash as permanent. The Biden administration has been working to forgive up to 30% of outstanding student loans, but that is currently in doubt, with the Supreme Court expected to rule within the next month that the president lacks the authority to cancel the debts. Because the president has been signaling a desire to cancel student loans and consumers have not made payments in over 3 years, the resumption of payments will come as a personal cash flow shock to many households. No doubt about it, there's many people that have been spending this $393 a month on average on other things all throughout the economy. And now, all of a sudden, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. What will that mean? Even if they can stay up to date with their car payments and any other debts they may have, it means less eating out, not buying a new phone, not buying all these different items that drive the economy, the consumer spending that drives the economy. So that is also going to be an additional weight on the economy moving forward. But we see it's already bad out there, guys. We see in this article right here from Markets Insider, Dollar General sinks 19% on a slashed profit outlook as the company says its budget-sensitive customers are relying more on food banks and credit cards. So we read down, it says Dollar General shares plunged Thursday. So this was, 3 weeks ago. As the discount retailer's budget-sensitive customers are pulling back on spending, prompting the company to cut its financial outlooks. The company said its customers were continuing to shift more of their spending from discretionary items as the focus on so as to focus on basics such as food. Sales and earnings for its fiscal first quarter fell short of Wall Street targets, and the company sliced full-year projections. Smaller than expected tax refunds. That was something that a couple of years ago they expanded the child tax credit, and they actually prepaid half of that out over the back part of the year. So people were getting these large checks every month, and they thought, oh, this is just additional spending from the government. They're just sending us checks. They didn't realize that was part of their child tax credit prepaid. So when it came time to get their tax refund, well, a lot of people were surprised to find out, well, you already received most of it. And so they were expecting to have a certain amount, and they ended up with half that amount. Much the same as there are many that are going to be surprised and shocked when they have to start making these student loan payments again. But it says, smaller than expected tax refunds and reduced benefits for food stamps were cutting into how much shoppers could spend, the company said on a conference call. Unfortunately, our customers are saying they're having to rely more on food banks, savings, and credit cards. And keep in mind, credit cards with super high rates now. Not that they weren't always super high, but they're even worse now. Oh, and that's what they say in the next sentence. As we all know, credit card rates are at an all-time high, the company's CEO, Jeffrey Owen, said on the call, according to a transcript. Financial strain on shoppers is drawing them to seek more affordable items, including products at or below the $1 price point, the retailer said. So their customers are having to rely more on food banks, savings, and credit cards to eat, guys. This is an act of desperation. When you're putting your groceries on the credit card and paying all-time high interest rate on that credit card debt, it's because you have to. You have no other choice. And that tells us how bad it is out there. And guys, it's just going to get worse, because here we read in the American Banker, big commercial real estate downturn could sink 300 plus banks, according to this report. It says a sharp downturn in commercial real estate performance could have a big impact on the banking sector, but not big enough to destabilize the financial system, according to analysis from one of the top real estate economists in the country. I love this line right here. So, yeah, but not big enough to destabilize the financial system. And now my question would be, well, who asked? Why'd you throw that out there? And when I read that, it reminded me of this, right? I think you're protesting just a little bit too much, whoever wrote this article, Kyle Campbell, because there wasn't anything in here about destabilizing the financial system. But here he's doing what? He's giving the official denial. What do we always talk about? The official denial. Oh, not big enough to destabilize the financial system. Let me translate for you. That means it's going to be big enough to destabilize the financial system. That's what this type of stuff means. He says more than 300 banks have enough commercial real estate loans on their books to see their Tier 1 capital wiped out under a worst-case scenario, Richard Barkham, chief economist and head of research at CB Richard Ellis, said this week during a conference call hosted by the National Association of Real Estate Editors. Now, I love this one too. We have, and I don't know whether this is Richard Barkham saying this or it's Kyle Campbell, the author, but he says, under a worst-case scenario, so more than 300 banks will see their Tier 1 capital wiped out under a worst-case scenario. Well, I guess he doesn't understand the definition of a worst-case scenario, because the worst-case scenario would be all of the banks are wiped out of their Tier 1 capital. That would be the worst-case scenario, I would think. But let me tell you guys, if you're a Christian, if you know the Lord, all of this We have hope through these times. Well, let me tell you, if you do not know the Lord, then the worst case scenario we're looking at right now is far beyond 300 banks going down. It's far beyond all of the banks going down. The worst case scenario is that, well, we're heading into the tribulation as a result of all of this. And soon the Antichrist will control the globe, and he'll be able to control who can buy or sell anything. And you'll be forced to take a mark and worship him. Right. This would be the worst case scenario. Now, again, if you're a Christian, I don't believe that we'll be here, because I believe that the rapture of the church occurs before the tribulation. But even if we had to endure the tribulation, we have the hope of Jesus Christ. We know where we are going. We know how it ends in the end. We know where we will spend eternity. But if you have rejected Christ, well, let me tell you, this is your worst case scenario. You're seeing it unfold right here, because we are going into a global depression, no doubt about it in my mind. And what we're going to see is massive social unrest, economic chaos, and we're going to see the government rolling out these central bank digital currencies as the solution. Governments all around the world have no doubt about it. That's where they're headed. That's where what they're gonna push here. Don't think that on the other side of this crisis is more freedom and individual liberty and small government. No, it's exactly the opposite. On the other side of this crisis is global government, global tyranny, control over every aspect of your life, complete loss of all privacy, every transaction you make being monitored, every movement you make being monitored, cameras and microphones ubiquitous and all over the world, all the data coming in from those being sifted by AI algorithms that can tell the Antichrist and his minions exactly what's going on in the world, what you're doing. That is your worst case scenario, guys. And if you don't know Christ, I can tell you that worst case scenario is coming to fruition. We're seeing all of this happen. So if you don't know Jesus Christ, I would encourage you to invite him into your life right now, and you will get a peace that surpasses all understanding, so that when you see these things coming, rather than getting scared about it, rather than being fearful or wondering what's going to happen, you can know the Lord has it all. He will be victorious, no doubt about it. Doesn't mean that suffering won't take place in the meantime. Doesn't mean that bad things won't happen in the meantime. We live in a fallen world, but it means that you will have hope in the knowledge that Jesus is in control. Jesus wins. Jesus will be victorious. He's coming back, guys, because at the end of that tribulation period, Jesus will return to earth. He will banish all the evildoers, Satan, all of his minions, all of his demonic hordes, and he will rule over this earth. And it will be a wonderful place to be, guys. So peace is coming. Wonderful times are ahead. But between now and then, it's going to get really bad in the world. So if you don't know Jesus, that's the most important thing you can do right now to prepare for what is coming, because what's coming is not going to be good, in my opinion. That's just what I believe. Again, maybe you disagree. If so, leave your comments below. All comments are welcome except spammy comments. So just let me know what you think. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. When you do that, more people see these videos, and it can get, who knows, one person. If one person comes to know Jesus Christ as a result of you hitting a like button, wasn't it worth it? So make sure to do that. And guys, until next time, hopefully God willing, I will see you on Friday, and not miss Friday as I missed this past Monday, but I should be. So leave your comments, and God willing, I will see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.